Suzy, welcome. It's really exciting to have you here. I'm looking forward to our discussion. You're a different guest than we generally have. Today, we're not going to talk about inflation. We're not going to talk about the unemployment rate, but we're going to talk about something that almost all of our listeners have in common, and that is about people. So, regardless if you're in almost any business, it's hard to have a business without people. And so I'm excited to have you here to talk about people.
Okay.
Specifically, you are very well known right now as an NYU professor. You've gone viral recently with your NYU commencement speech, but you run a class at NYU called Becoming You, which is constantly oversold. Not that you're oversold in a class, but you can't get into the class.
Oh.
And so you've tapped into a zeitgeist of authenticity, and especially authenticity in the business world. And I'd like to talk about that both from being a employer under or employee under the guise that even if you're CEO, you're still an employee of the board. Everyone is employee at some point, and also under the rubric of being an employer. So if you're a leader, why is authenticity important? But to start, my first question for you is, can we talk about defining what do we mean when we say authenticity?
Yeah. Well, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to talk to you about inflation if you'd like, but probably leave that to people who are experts in it. Um, Authenticity is a misused and misunderstood word. It really is because everybody has a different definition of it. It's one of those words, and there's another word like that. It's values. Okay, that's another one. But authenticity, some people think it means letting it all hang out. What you see is what you get. I am who I am. I'm just going to be my whole self, and they have a kind of a version of it that makes other people raise their hackles because they're like, "Look, I don't want to know all that stuff about you. And how authentic do you have to be? Isn't anything private?" And on the other hand, there's people who have maybe a more conscribed definition of authenticity, which is a life where you are living according to your values. You have deeply held authentic beliefs, and they are matched with the work that you're doing or the life that you're living, and that would be called an authentic life. And in Becoming You, that's how we define an authentic life, that you have a certain set of values and you are living in accordance with them. That would be an authentic life. And that's the version of authenticity that I like a lot more than this sort of free form self expression at all times in your face. This is who I am. And that may be part of your authentic life, but it's not all that it is.
With the concept of authenticity, help me understand why it is so relevant to today's business world.
Well, authenticity has probably always been relevant. Why? Because authentic people are more likable, and business is based a lot of the times on relationships. And so having authenticity increases likability and trust. And so there's probably never been a time that authenticity hasn't been an asset in business. But it's actually more relevant than any time because of the zeitgeist that you mentioned earlier, which is that for coming out of the pandemic, there were very profound questions raised during the pandemic, weren't there? There were questions about how we work, where we work, why we work, who we work with, how often we work. All those questions were raised, and they haven't really been settled yet. And a lot of people are having a very complicated new relationship with work. Do I really want to work that much? Do I have to wait to be fulfilled? Do I really have to wait till I'm 65 to actually start living the life I really want? I think the pandemic just churned up a lot of existential despair. And coming out of it, a lot of people changed their lives and they realized, oh, I really can change my life. I can go live where I want to live, or I can work as much as I want to work. And what ended up happening as a result, maybe as an correction from what existed beforehand, was we are seeing precipitous drops in employee engagement. I mean, it's down 10% since 2019, and it's pretty low. I mean, so there's a lot of different polls with a lot of different
Right.
results. So let me put it this way in terms of the data: somewhere between 40 and 60% of all employees, depending on the poll, would describe themselves as disengaged from work. I don't care if you take 40 or 60, those are gigantic numbers, and they're worse than it was before the pandemic. People are disengaged. Why? My theory from my research would suggest that it's because they're asking these questions about fulfillment. Wait, I'm at work and maybe I'm not as fulfilled as I can or should be, and their engagement with the work lowers. And they had experiences with their employers during the pandemic where people were laid off, or they lost trust with their employer, and any kind of employee-employer contract that used to exist was getting frayed anyway as we approached the pandemic, whether we admit it or not. And now it's completely frayed. So what you have is organizations that are filled with people with very lessened degrees of engagement, which show up in lost productivity, which you can, I mean, there's some estimates that the lost productivity is as high as $8 trillion, which is
Oh,
a
wow.
massive amount of GDP, right? And even if it's half that, it's still a massive amount of GDP to have lost productivity. So it shows up as a business problem. And you know, as a leader, and any good leader knows that turnover is wildly expensive.
Mhm.
Turnover is expensive psychologically for the what it does to the organization, and it's expensive financially. And if you're a good leader, you don't want to have turnover. You don't want to lose good people. I mean, some people need to go because their performance is not good, but if you've got a good person, you want them to stay, right? And so this is related. Low engagement and people leaving, that's very related. And so there's this new onus for people who are going into the workplace to find work that they want to stay in, but for leaders to flip it on its head to figure out ways to increase authentically increase engagement and to lower turnover rates that they owe to their shareholders and to their teams to lower turnover.
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed is that with low engagement, ironically, while it does cause turnover, it doesn't cause turnover of the lowly engaged employee, right?
Yeah, right.
Lowly
That's
engaged
right. That's a
employees
great
are
point.
turning over the people who are highly engaged
Yes,
because it
that's
sets a bad culture.
that is an absolutely fantastic point. That's a great point. Is that sadly in organizations with low turnover, what happens is with low engagement,
Mhm.
the high performers leave. They're like, I'm out of here. I want to be where people are like me, engaged, and so you lose your best people. And when you've got if you've got 60% disengagement, the top people are like looking at the exits. They want to go
Right.
where people are energized. And so you're right. Some of the people you would like to leave don't leave. They're just plodding along.
And as we think through the reasons for the low engagement, there could be a variety of reasons,
Yes.
right? There's sometimes people just start and go, "Hey, my starting premise is I'm never going to be happy here. I'm just doing this job to pay my bills," and don't even believe that engagement is possible from people who feel for a variety of the food's not right, the location isn't right, the office policy isn't right, my manager isn't right. For an employee with low engagement scores, what are the things that can be changed?
I think well, let's talk about the reasons for a
Yeah.
second. Let's go to what can be changed. I think you've hit some of the main reasons, okay? But the main reason employees are not engaged is there's a lack of trust for the employer. They feel like they could go at any moment. They feel like the employer does not care about them fully. They don't see them as individuals. And
Mhm.
that's an old story in business. It's as, there was sort of a Camelot-like period where people had more trust in their companies. That was fading anyway. But the bigger reason is that people don't see the meaning of their work. They don't see its connection to their own values, and they don't see it connected to anything higher. And one thing you can take issue with Gen Z. I happen to love them very much and think they bring a lot of great things to the world. But one thing that they really are positive about is your work has got to have some meaning and give back. And so you come into work and your manager is not explaining to you why your work matters or why this should touch your authentic self or have any meaning to you. And it's just you just fill in the hours of the day. So I'm a management professor. Along with becoming you, I teach a class on how to be a good boss. It's called managerial skills, and it's blocking and tackling management. And in that class, it's 12 weeks, 3-hour classes where I'm teaching every kind of management. And if I had to boil it down to one lesson, it would be a lesson that I read in a rock and roll magazine because I used to run a music tech company, and it came from the manager. He was a roadie on
Mhm.
for a punk rock band, and he was talking about what he learned on the road with a punk rock band, and he said, "You know what? You got to tell the drummer what the words of the song mean." And he was actually talking literally. You've got to tell the drummer because they had a drummer who was sort of going off the rails, and he wasn't like keeping the beat, and he was like singing the wrong words. And they said, "We realize you got to tell the drummer what the words of the song mean so he can be sort of more part of the movement." But actually, it's like the greatest leadership advice. The drummer has to know what the words of the song mean. Your people have to know why your work has meaning, why you're doing it, what its purpose is, and then they've got to be able to connect their own purpose to it.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's just to build on what you said about the reasons why people were disengaged. We're not doing good enough job as leaders explaining how our work is connected to some higher purpose, and it has to be for most people today. That's what we learned during the pandemic. People don't want to be working for a paycheck only. They don't. I mean, otherwise, we've got 50 something, 52% of all recent graduates saying the number one most important thing to them when they leave the workforce is work life balance. Okay, down at the bottom of the list, number 8, okay, this is a good research that was done out of Meta, and it goes through their Handshake, which is their platform for job seekers in the college age space. Number 8 on that list, work-life balance, number 1. Number 8, advancing in their careers. I mean, generally, generationally, for me, it's like, what are you kidding me? The
Right.
last thing I cared about when I was 21 years old was work-life balance, and I don't care very much about it now anymore, anyway, either. Okay, because I just love work, and that's like I'm like a alien talking to my students about that. So the reasons are this cultural zeitgeist where there's frayed trust, but also this feeling like, why would I give my whole life? They're not doing anything meaningful. I want balance instead. Okay, so I think your next question was, what are the solutions, right?
Next question is, what are the solutions?
Yeah.
Yes.
I am the director of NYU Stern's initiative on purpose and flourishing, and this is exactly what a group of scholars and I are think about day and night is what are we doing to fix this problem? And the answer is probably now we're formulating answers right now, and we're doing a lot of research on it and talking to a lot of executives and getting their learned experience to help inform us. But I think it's an answer that not a lot of executives are gonna really like all that much. Why? Because, you're busy and you're doing your work and you think you're already putting all this time and energy into people, and no matter how much time and energy you're putting into them, they're still disengaged and you're losing your mind, as is your CHRO and so forth. The answer is you have to give the people what they want, which is they wanna be seen, they wanna be heard, they wanna be known for who they are, and they want the work to match their values. Okay,
Okay.
so, ugh, I don't wanna do that. They don't deserve it. I'm paying them. Isn't that enough? Well, get it. Sadly, it's not enough anymore. I mean, people have to have a sense of meaning. So you have to help them understand who they are. Most people don't know that. I have just completed a research study at NYU that has some pretty shocking numbers, such shocking numbers that we're going to rerun the research, suggesting
Really?
that I endeavored to discover with my research how many people know what their values are. Okay, this is for somebody like me whose area of expertise is values formation. This was quite an interesting question because my intuition was I've talked to people about their values for 20 something years, and most people, unless they're very self actualized or highly evolved, can't really list their values. They're very general and generic. Family, financial security, happiness, and these are gigantic buckets. I mean, this is like the ocean, okay? And
Mhm.
real values are actually much more narrow. There's actually 13 Uber values that everybody has exists on along a continuum. Uh, and I could make you very bored talking about them, although they're quite fascinating to me. My bigger question was how many people know what their values are? Because you have to know what they are to then go live a life according to them. And this is why you have sort of vague unhappiness is people like don't really know what their values are, and then they go looking for a life to satisfy something they don't really know what it is.
Right.
This is a
Right.
problem, okay? So I did research to ask people, and I didn't. One of the questions was very open ended, which was, "What are your values?" And 70% of the people answered terms that are not values. So, this was, they sort of put down words like integrity, and this is a virtue,
Yes.
not a value.
Not a value.
Okay, so now I don't want to get too technical on it, except for that it has these gigantic impacts. And if you don't know what your actual values are, and then you go looking for work or a lifestyle to match those values, and you don't actually even know what they are to begin with, you are in a vicious circle.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have to rerun this research because I anticipated 40% and it was a pretty big study, ends up being 70%. You end up scratching your head saying, did I do something? We changed some of the words, we changed the order of some of the questions, and we'll see what happens next time. Uh, Regardless, it's going to be high. But this is an incredible opportunity for employers. Incredible, because imagine the gift you could give your employees if you introduced a program or a curriculum or a boot camp or something where they were part of a guided process where they discovered what their actual values were. That gives you the data to help say to them, look how these values are so aligned with our organizational values. Isn't that marvelous? You do have meaning in your work. And this is a gift that you give them while you give it to yourself. Okay. So there's very few things in business that truly are good for you, good for humanity, good for your employee, all at the same time, good for the shareholders. This is one of them. Helping your employees discover their authentic values and then hopefully being able to show them the points of agreement with your own values. So we are developing a program right now at the Institute to do this, and we can't wait to get it out into the wild because I think it's going to have a very important impact.
So I find that really exciting.
Yeah.
I think it goes against a cultural force that I dislike right now, which is short-termism,
Mm,
right? But that is the type of thing that I believe is a long-term investment that at
yes.
first, if you're into just like what's next quarter's results
Yeah.
and you see the expense of, well, I'm going to teach my employees their values,
Yeah.
you might go, well, that doesn't, like,
It's a
how's that helping my
This is
EBITDA
a
this year?
minor expense. I mean, this
Right.
is a minor expense. This is not giving everybody gym membership, although I recommend that also. But I'd say that it's not going to be a big expense, and but it is a long term investment. But keeping your people is this is a big expense overall, as we've said. Turnover is expensive.
But yeah, I believe that you find the highest performing companies tend to have the employees who are most authentically aligned
Yes,
with the
absolutely,
company, both with themselves and with the company. When that
absolutely.
comes together and that works, that
Yeah,
somebody's aligned, like they're doing something that they're made to do, and it
yeah.
helps your economic engine and your vision as a company, that's when the
Yeah.
world gets changed.
Matt, you don't want people staying at your company because of the kombucha. Okay, okay,
Right.
great. I mean, but if that's what's keeping them out, give them the kombucha. Everybody loves it so much.
Yeah.
But if you don't want them staying for that, you want them staying for something more than that, the work. The actual work. And so then you have to make the work have meaning for them. And that is a process. That doesn't happen with you standing up and giving just a speech.
Hmm.
That involves you helping them understand what their values are and showing them then the next step is how it aligns with what the organization's values are. Because we're not even getting into the territory where most companies don't know what their own values are and don't talk about them enough with enough reality and authenticity that their people know what they are.
Right.
So this is a piece of work that all organizations should be. I mean, it's really what HR should be doing, but then HR gets distracted by a lot of other stuff that they have to do.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to circle back on something you had said about Gen Z.
Mm,
From your opinion, what are some of the biggest misconceptions of Gen Z?
yeah.
And then also, what are some of the biggest assets that Gen Z brings to the table?
Right, so Gen Z is just like any generation. There's a lot of variety within it. Okay, so I'm now about to say some very general things about Gen Z, which is true about some of them and not all of them. It's like, it's when you go to another country and somebody says to you, "Oh, I've been to America," and you say, "Where have you been?" and they say Atlanta, and you say, "Well, you haven't been to my America, right? My America is New York, or my America is where I'm from, Portland,
Right.
Oregon, or whatever, right?" So I'll talk about Gen Z, but just there's
Gross
right. I'm going
generalizations.
to now make gross generalizations. Thank you. So I think the misconception is that they're lazy and nihilistic and they don't want to work and in some case that's how a lot of their attitudes or their assumptions about the world present. So one of the things about Gen Z is they saw what happened to their parents in the workforce. They got batted around and then they got fired. And then they had to pick themselves up and start again. And their parents' careers in many cases did not go straight up. And they saw their parents get kind of manipulated or hurt by the man. Okay. And so they don't have a lot of trust going into organizations. But the second and bigger part of it is they have no reason to believe that they're ever going to have economic security. I don't know about you, but I'm old enough that when I was in college, I thought for sure I'm going to have more money than my parents. And that if I work very, very hard, I'm going to buy a house someday. And this was the assumption. And a lot of Gen Z just, I mean, sadly, I mean, it's all the way to the extreme of saying, I'm not even sure we're all going to be alive in 20 years because of global warming. And the world is probably going to end anyway because of the stupidity of decisions your generation's made. And I'm certainly not going to own a home. That is and I don't know if any of us in our shoes can put ourselves inside of that kind of mindset of deep kind of pessimism is really what it is. And it's just sort of like, why should I even try? It's just it's very, very hard.
Right.
Okay. And so I think that what it ends up looking like is that they're lazy or they don't want to put in the effort to work or they don't want to invest themselves into a growth path that has a dead end to it. And it comes out looking kind of it comes out looking in a way that we don't understand how this sort of place of vulnerability and sadness that it's kind of coming from. You have to sort of paint a picture for Gen Z employees that I don't know, it might actually work out and we might actually all make it and we might dodge this bullet and there's a really great career path for you if you buy in. But it's an exercise on the part of managers to uh, bring them inside their optimism if they've got it themselves. They don't come to it naturally.
Mhm. Susie, in your work, you've talked about the value of adversity. You've talked actually about the value of being fired before.
Hmm. Yeah.
Can you speak more to that? Can you speak more to because so much of
Yeah.
our life right now is about comfort. Is about
Yeah.
like, hey, can I remove any adversity in my life?
Yes.
Is there a benefit of adversity? How
Yeah,
do we think about adversity?
yep. This was probably the Wall Street Journal op-ed that I wrote that got the most hate. And I consider that a complete badge of honor, where I basically said, stop picking on Gen Z. It's our fault that they are the way they are. And what I talked about was that there is just a general, it was my generation of parents and probably the one right after, where we did everything to make sure our kids did not feel anxiety, that we wanted their worlds to be perfect, that we prevented them from having adversity. I mean, John Haidt, the great scholar out of NYU, writes about this right now, is that that we overprotect children when they're out of the house. And but it's bigger than that. It's just not letting kids fail and telling them when they fail that it was okay. And so then what happens is they get out into the real world and they do fail and they do face hard things and it's not easy. And then what do they feel? They feel anxiety. Why? Because they've had no practice failing.
Right.
And so this is on us. We didn't let them fail. And of course, this was not very happily received. Just like, don't blame me for my kids' behavior. And I'm like, okay. But I would say that, we've got to look at the fact that they have no practice. Now, they will get practice with adversity, but the first couple of years, you're learning that the world is hard and life is hard, are not easy ones. And so the way that the language around it in society generally has been, I feel a lot of anxiety. And I have to say that one of the most daring things I say to my class, and I always say it like, please don't cancel me, but I'm going to suggest that some of this just might be adulthood. Now, anxiety is a real disease, and people have it. I have family members who have it, and it's not anything that's it's real, and you need medicine, and you need to be in doctor's care. But general free floating angst, okay, is a different thing. But the word anxiety is slapped on it, and that is generally adulthood. And adulthood, sadly, is filled with trade-offs, okay? Where like you can't have it all at the same time. You can't have fun, adventure, and spontaneity and also be a deeply present parent. And then that gives people anxiety, but
Right.
actually you're just being an adult, sorry. And so this is a hard message to give to Gen Z. They're going to learn it themselves in their own time and then they'll turn around and tell it to their children, but they're finding it out later in the game than I did, because like I'm from the generation where literally in the summertime, I don't know if I even saw my parents. They just put us outside and we like went and played. Okay. And so a lot of bad stuff happened and you got hurt and and you had to take care of yourself and so forth and so on. But you figured it out and you understood, okay, bad things can happen and I actually get through them. And this is why I walk into my class and I always say at the beginning, hello, shiny, bright MBAs. How many of you have been fired? Okay. Because they've all had a couple of years working.
Hmm.
Oh my God, oh no, nobody raises their hand. Now, of course, if they've been fired, most of them wouldn't be at NYU or whatever, but the idea of being fired drives them out of their mind. They don't want to be fired. And I have to say to them, look, I know it's a painful experience. I've been fired. It's embarrassing. You have self-doubt. You feel like a fraud. Everything that it's not a great experience. But then you get through it, and usually life gets better. I mean, usually you get a better job. You got fired for a reason, okay? Some of the times it was the industry's shrinking. You weren't a fit for it, whatever, okay? And you get through it, and eventually, you get a better job, and you think, oh, I failed and I didn't die. And this gives you courage and strength, and it gives you all sorts of resilience that you didn't know you had. It's a pretty good muscle to develop young, okay? And then you get to the point where like, oh, I might get fired, but I'm doing what I really believe in here, and it's not a bad thing. I mean, you don't want to make a practice of getting fired, okay? And if you get fired too many times, you got to just start working for yourself. You're just not a person who should work in an organization after a certain point, and that's a type, and that's fine. But failure is not going to kill you. And when you realize that, it's a fantastic, fantastic thing to have.
Right. So, adding on to that,
Yeah.
there's the idea of general angst.
Yes.
There's also in the for people who've been in their careers for about a decade,
Yeah.
they've seen the great financial crisis, then they've seen COVID, and there is this just general
Yeah.
hopelessness. And you can see this hopelessness does overlap with, and I believe it's probably part of like, well, the man's out here just to get me.
Yeah.
And why don't I get as much from the man as I can? Because who
Yeah.
knows when the next pandemic hits.
This is exactly why we have these record low, historic low engagement, is exactly what you're talking about. This, I don't trust them. I don't believe
Right.
in them. And they're just going to try to use me and I'm going to try to use them. Yep.
So is it hopeless?
I don't believe so, or I wouldn't be teaching a class to combat it, right?
Hmm.
I do think that there's two parts to the solution. One is that you as an individual figure out what your values are, figure out what your aptitudes are and what your interests are, and then that at the center of that, at the intersection of that, that's your area of transcendence, this place that you should be living and working, and go work there so that you are in your, you're doing what you can do, you should do, and you want to do. Okay, that's hard work for you. But then the onus goes on to the managers, goes on to the leaders, goes on to to the people who run organizations to help their employees figure that out. It's very hard to do on your own. You have to help them. You have to have good managers who care about the people and say, "Let me help you help you go on a journey where you understand your values and your aptitudes and your interests so that you can be living authentically, hopefully with us." you know? And if you go, you go. But if you stay, you're going to really like me a lot for helping you on this journey.
Right.
And that becomes the job of good leaders.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's interesting as you say that. So you and I meet in person on the day that you published in the Wall Street Journal your article on Crotonville,
Yeah. Yeah.
and about some of your sadness that Crotonville has gone away.
Yeah.
In my experience, and actually my background is my first job was GE,
Yeah.
and I went to Crotonville and I got to experience the whole thing.
Yeah.
One of the things that we found in our company is when we go and do surveys on employee engagement,
Yeah.
that we can't generally have an employee who is more engaged than his or her manager.
Right.
So the manager, and we also find the biggest correlation to employee engagement is how much is their connection to their manager.
Right.
There's
Absolutely.
certainly other factors, so I'm not suggesting it's the only one, but that seems to
Oh,
be the factor, the
absolutely.
day-to-day factor that matters. And the inverse of what I said is true. So if you have on a scale of 1 to 10,
Yeah.
if you have a manager who's an 8 on engagement, you
Right.
can have a team that's an 8 on engagement.
Absolutely.
However, if you have a manager who's a 3 on engagement, it's very hard for the team to be more engaged
They will not be.
than the
Yeah.
manager. And back to trying to tie our data together with your article on
Yeah.
Crotonville is it seems like now would be the absolute worst time to be pulling away from teaching managers how to be engaged at work and how to be engaged
Yes.
with their teams at
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
So your article resonated with me because
Yeah.
it does feel like that's another one of the antidotes to
Yeah.
what's going on
Yeah.
is to be investing in managers right now, not to be underinvesting
Totally.
in managers.
Mhm. I mean, when I write for the journal, which I'm very lucky to do on occasion, I try not to write about Jack because he had his own legacy and he wrote for the journal himself as well. But this was what happened was Crotonville was sold, and so many people called me that weekend and said, "Oh, how do you feel about Crotonville? How would Jack feel?" And so I thought, okay, fine, I'll write a piece about how Jack would feel. And my feeling was Jack would be very sad. Not that the building was closing, because he was not a big person who cared about buildings and so forth, but he would care that this era had ended where employees thought it was a big honor to go into a corporate headquarters, hang out with their coworkers, and all get engaged together. Okay,
Right.
like get really really excited about the work and each other. That would make him sad that that period had ended. It makes me sad. Okay, and I wasn't even at GE. So and I mean there was a lot of every time you write for the Wall Street Journal, you get a lot of comments and I go in and I read them, and yours, yours not supposed to do that, but I do. I'm really curious to know what people say. In that one, there was a lot of kind of very mixed arguments. There's sort of people who said, "I miss that era. I remember it, but it's dead and gone." And then there were people who said that era never existed. But there were very strong feelings because the headline said, "The sale of Crotonville and the end of fun at work."
Hmm.
And what people fixated on was, is work fun anymore? And that is a really gigantic zeitgeist change. I mean,
Right.
I remember my whole career work has been fun. I mean, I've been a reporter and I love my fellow professors at NYU. We have fun. I have fun in the classroom. I have had Gen Z employees in our workplace is fun. This company that I run, we have a very good time. We have great people who work there, and they come right out of college. And the biggest thing they have to learn first is that work can be fun. And I have a woman who works with me. She's 2 years out of college, and on the weekends, her roommates say to her, "Stop talking about work." And she's, "But work is fun." And they're like, "Stop, like don't say that." But work can be fun, and that is the gigantic generational uh, change. And it's too bad because we spend a lot of time at work. It should be fun.
Absolutely. In your commencement speech,
Yeah.
you gave a couple you gave a couple of your top tips, some of which I really enjoyed and some of which were countercultural.
Yeah.
But I think they all still really align with you and kind of your main message.
Yeah.
Want to ask you to speak about some of those. Let's start with I think one of my favorite ones, which was don't network.
Yeah, don't network. I thought I was going to be fired when I said that. So I gave the commencement speech at Stern this year, and they give you 4 minutes to speak, and I was like, 4 minutes to tell them everything that I know, and so I did my best. So I had to really boil it down, and generally, I don't like giving tips because work and life is just so much more complicated than that. But I thought a lot is said when you tell students not to network, and then I turned to the dean and asked if I was fired, because of course, students in college are told by their parents and their professors, network, network, network. And I just think it's nonsense. I think it's nonsense because I watched business for the past 40 years of my life and I see how it works. And it works because of friendships, not networking. It works because over the course of your life, you have become friends with somebody. You have done favors for them without any expectation of return. You have shown that you're a good person. You have shown up when they needed you. You have helped them without expecting them to do anything for you in the moment. And then over time, one day there's a piece of business, and they're the ones who help you get it. And this is how business is actually run: relationship, friendship on top of friendship on top of friendship, interlocked friendships. And this idea that you're going to stand in a vast hotel conference room and hand somebody your card and it's going to result in a great career is completely crazy. And you should take the time that you waste networking
Hmm.
and commit it to learning how to be a friend to people. And not everybody has to be your bestie. I'm not saying, go out there and make dear friends with everybody. Just think about every single person like a tile, and your friends then become all the tiles in the beautiful mosaic of your life. Okay, no one tile stands alone. This is the metaphor, just go that distance. Don't have these phony, inauthentic, networked relationships. This person's going to help you. It's just, they're not going to help you. Your friends will help you. And I was on the stage with Ken Langone, who gave a commencement address, also very beautiful, heartfelt. He's a great icon and a wonderful human being. And I said, "Let's just see if I'm right about this." And he was sitting there. I said, "Ken Langone, am I right?" And I watched his career for the past 20 something years, and he has had this magnificent career, 100% based on him being a friend to people and collecting as many friends as he could. So.
So how do you square that with a feeling that you get right now
Mhm.
from people, especially from younger generations of, look, I don't want to have personal connections in my work.
Yeah, I
I
know.
want to keep that. I want
Totally.
to keep that away. My personal connections are my friends, and I want to totally
That's
insulate
right.
them from anything at work. So how do
So,
we bring these
okay,
together?
okay, so, I mean, this is exactly, you're identifying a completely true dynamic. So, I was teaching the other class that I teach, managerial skills.
Hmm.
And as part of that class, I had a woman come in, Emily Fields. She's a partner at McKinsey, and she'd written a brilliant book called Power to the Middle, about really what the new role of the middle manager is. It's hard to be a middle manager. And I wanted my students who are going to be middle managers before they're big managers to hear from her. At the end of the class, she was doing a Q&A. And we were going back and forth. And she said something that sparked something in me. And I said, after all, at the end of the day, management is really an act of love. And she said, oh, absolutely. And she and I kept talking like this was normal to talk about management as an act of love. And we looked up sort of simultaneously and we saw basically 70 people going, you know, and people, hands shot up. I said, what is the problem in the room? What is the problem? And hands shot up, and people were like, you cannot be friends with people at work. You cannot have false families. You have to have boundaries. I don't have any friends at work. Friends are for outside of work. And I was like, oh, you're missing one of the greatest parts of life is laughing your rear ends off with people at work. You're spending all this. I'm not telling you to make work your family. That's dangerous.
Right.
That is not good. Okay. But to not be friends and authentic friends with the people you work with is a gigantic loss in your life, okay? And I'm stunned by this. I'm not going to say all, but like maybe 70% of my close friends I made at work along the way. We were doing things together, we were helping each other, we were growing up together. I don't get it, but you're 100% right. That's part of the zeitgeist, and it's too darn bad.
That is, it's a tricky balance. I have seen, and I do think this is when employers can abuse it, when they start saying, "Hey, we're a family here,"
Yeah, no, don't use
and
that word.
for
Yeah.
better or worse, you can't really fire your family.
Yeah.
So work shouldn't necessarily be a
No.
family, but it doesn't mean you can't have incredibly important relationships.
Yeah.
And we all spend so much of our time, energy, and effort. I do feel like
Yeah.
it's like not having a meal and just eating a pill.
I know, no, right, yeah, yeah,
If
so
you're like,
true.
I'm not going to
Yeah.
enjoy the actual beauty of the relationships you can make at work.
And it means that for all those hours of the day, you're not authentic.
Right.
you're just holding it. And I find that you really can't hold your breath that long.
Uh,
And then you're
the same thing. Yeah.
very miserable at work, and you wonder why. It was, well, yeah, because you were holding your breath all day. Not being yourself, waiting to be yourself with your friends. But one thing, you have to be able to say to somebody, you're my friend. I really, really like you. But we have to talk about performance here.
Hmm.
We have to talk about your results here, okay? Because you're my friend, it doesn't mean that you can't. I mean, we are a for-profit organization, and we've got to actually care about performance as well. And some managers are good enough to do that. That's the dangerous lining, but
Right.
good
Right.
managers can do it.
Yeah. Sports analogies, I find actually this is one of the cases they almost always work when you go, well, we can't have a sports team that doesn't win.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
Now
that's a
we should
great
have a
one.
lot of fun when we're winning,
Right.
but there isn't really a
That's a
dynamic
great one.
where we
Yeah.
can't do this and we can't keep pushing forward and
Yeah.
winning. One of your other ones I want to talk about is your concept of don't look for the silver bullet
Oh,
mentor
yeah.
in your life. And I want to ask you this in two different ways.
Yeah.
So let's start with what do you mean when you say that?
There is this myth. I hate this myth. It's a dangerous myth, and it's a destructive myth. And the myth is that there's going to be some fabulous mentor where you go to work, and this person's going to be older and wiser and very connected, and they're going to gallop in on a white stallion, and they're going to swoop you up onto the saddle, and they're going to carry you and your career into the golden land, right, into the promised land. And in my long career, I've probably seen that happen 3 or 4 times, where there's been just a very important person who chose somebody and mentored them to great success. Those are very unusual relationships, and they're really fragile.
Hmm.
Okay. So, and they don't happen to very many people. And so what happens is you're told, get mentors, get mentors, get mentors. And then you go looking for that mentor, and that mentor doesn't really exist. Okay. Go find and then it also sort of says, like, I need help. I need the Latin term deus ex machina to come in and save me. Okay. And you sort of like, wait, no, sorry, you got to do it for yourself. And you're very, very lucky. You'll find smart people. So my theory is that everybody should be a mentor. People that you know and people you don't know, people you watch in the news, people who you look at in this. Oh, I think she's fantastic in this industry. Her career fascinates me. She's kind of my, mentor. She doesn't know it. I mean, I was talking about this on the Today Show the other day, and I said to Hoda and Jenna, you're my mentors. I watch them all the time and learn from them. I mean, it's not like they're talking to me one on one, except for when I'm on the show. I mean, anyone and everyone can be a mentor, equal to you, below you. My Gen Z team members who work with me mentor me all the time in understanding this new world, and they teach me all sorts of technology stuff all the time. Why would I think it was a one-way street with me mentoring them? And so I like this attitude better, that I can learn from everybody. And I don't like this attitude, I need somebody to come carry me into the future, who's big and important. And the reason why that doesn't happen very often is that those big important people are very busy, and you got to be kind of spectacular for them to say. What they usually say is, "There's a young me. I'm going to go help that one."
Right.
Okay, and you know that we're talking very small odds of that happening.
So it's interesting. In my career, I'd probably asked three or four kind of silver bullet mentors and got turned down by all of them.
Yeah, right.
And the biggest mentors in my career probably never knew they were mentoring
Yeah.
me. Often it was not even a collegial relationship. It may have been an adversarial
Yes,
relationship,
absolutely.
right? But to this day, I would, if I saw him on the street, would thank him to go, some of the best lessons I learned in life
Yes.
were from the ways you mistreated me.
That's right.
Thank you.
Right. I know. I mean, you often, the people who are terrible to you are mentors because you think I'm going to define myself in opposition to them.
Hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
So if we flip it around, though, as leaders, how should we think about when and how to mentor? Because there is this thing of like, oh, I only want to mentor someone who reminds me of a young me.
Yeah, I
But it
know.
turns out there's very few people who can take the same path to like leadership. It takes all different shapes and
Yeah.
sizes. So if you do want to see development, like how do you become a mentor
I
if you're
think
a
that's
leader?
just being a good leader. I mean, I actually don't think ever I am a mentor at X, Y, and Z, but I've probably mentored hundreds of women,
Hmm.
generally young women who have worked for me, who I've known or have been students. And I've just fallen into that role because I really care about them. And I do the extra step of trying to give them feedback along the way. I mean, by my example also of how I've lived and how I act, I'm a mentor to them. And so I think that, I mean, I definitely have fallen into very close relationships with women that I've worked with. And I guess that if you ask them, they would say, oh, she was a mentor to me. Okay. But I've thought about, I'm just trying to be a good manager. I'm
Right.
trying to be a good role model. And it doesn't have to be as formal as that.
Uh, as I'm thinking about it here and then reflecting my own experience,
Yeah.
actually, I think one of the answers to that question is to go through something like the Becoming You course
Yeah.
as a leader,
Yeah.
well, automatically, the more authentic you are as a leader, the
Yes.
more you'll be a good, people will see you as a mentor, even if it's not a
Yeah.
direct, like, we signed a contract, I'm your mentor for the next
Right.
year
Yeah.
relationship. You become the type of person that
Yeah.
folks want to follow.
I think it's true. I mean, I think the more in touch you are with your values, the more likely you are to mentor because the more you know about yourself, the more available you are to give of yourself.
Hmm.
I mean, I think when you're not sure who you are, it's very hard to be generous of your heart and your spirit and your time. The people who are comfortable in their own shoes and sort of know what they're good at and know what they value are just always in a better position to be generous. When my kids were growing up, I have 4 children, when they were growing up and I was really exhausted, I was a terrible mother. And I would shout at them, "My teapot is empty. You are my little teacups, and I have nothing to pour in. Nobody's pouring into my teapot." My poor kids, they're all 30 and very happy now. So I'm in their 30s. But there were some rough years in there because I have 4 kids, 5 years apart. And I think when you're a boss, your teapot's got to be filled, and you fill it up with your feelings of purpose. You fill it up with your feelings of fulfillment. And the way you do that is by knowing what you authentically care about so that you can then give. And so, obviously, I'm like a gigantic stan of Becoming You because I think it's a very good but I think it has all these different layers of helping because your employees learn who they are, and as leaders go through it themselves, they learn who they are. I mean, and it creates a language to talk about values and aptitudes that frees everybody up to do their best work in their most authentic presentations of themselves.
Right. Okay, so we've been talking about people, but I can't get too far away from my finance roots.
Yes.
I read a story recently about a hedge fund
Mhm.
who had hired analysts to go and scour apartment pools in the day, and they would interview the people at the pool and say, "Where do you work?" And figure out where they work, and then the hedge fund was going and shorting
Shorting it.
all the companies. Um,
That is one of the smartest things I've ever heard. That's pretty great. That's really clever. Yeah.
Are there ways, when we put on our investor hats,
Yes.
that because what we're talking about with people, at the end of the day, I believe it's dollars and cents in terms of value,
Right.
right? You do not want to be investing in a company that's not managing its people well, that has
Yeah.
engagement scores where you have unengaged at 40 or 50%. How do outsiders of us as investors actually look at this and invest in the right companies
Okay.
and avoid the wrong ones?
Okay, so this is a subtle question. And I'm not surprised you're asking me a subtle question because you can be a company where a lot of people are disengaged and the numbers are 50%, but the top performers are highly engaged, and that's a reflection of your compensation system and your reward system. And I mean, there are probably some very very good banks where the mass of people are very disengaged, but they picked out the people who deliver the results that shareholders want and they really just pour all the love on them and they are the ones and that's an unhealthy culture which will eventually collapse, but it can go on for years. It could
Right.
probably so I would say there's probably only one way. I mean there's maybe a few ways, but immediately I would say any company that you would invest in, if they don't have an NPS score on their employees where they're asking every employee, would you recommend somebody work here, and then they publicly disclose their NPS score, it's a very big red flag. Ask them, or do you do that? And you want a company that's got NPS score of 75% or above. It's rare, but at least you then know the culture is healthy.
Right.
But I like that pool trick. That's very good. I would also go check the golf courses and try the same thing in certain industries. But it's pretty hard to game this because I mean it's pretty easy to game this because you could have companies where the very top performers are the only ones getting the love. And again, that's a fragile system. I mean, I'm thinking of some banks here, okay?
Yes.
But it could go on for quite some time.
It is interesting because you're right. Once you get a crack in the system, though,
Yeah.
it's interesting the speed at which we know the crack.
Yes.
We know it's going to fall off, right?
Right.
It's like a glacier. Like the crack is there. Will
Yes.
like collapse in a week. Will collapse in a decade.
Yes. Well, I
Um,
mean, look, you know as well as that the companies fail because of their culture.
right.
It's never strategy. It's like the great Peter Drucker said, is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And at the end of the day, what brings a company down and its performance immediately starts to show for it is an unhealthy culture. And the best way you can have a good culture is to have people who are engaged from the bottom to the top. It's an extremely long-term perspective to have. But any good leader knows that the only good game is the long game. The
Hmm.
only game is the long game. Okay. And so if you got people who are investing in people all the way up and down, not just the top performers. That's a pretty good proxy for how they're going to be doing over the long run.
Yeah, and the reverse, I noticed, I won't pick on any companies in particular, but I noticed, especially during COVID,
Yeah.
you would have certain companies where their frontline employees had to be in person,
Yeah.
and their
Yeah.
management
Was at
uh,
home.
was at home,
Yeah.
and it always kind of struck me as strange to
Yeah.
go, isn't there an overall camaraderie here? Like, do you want an us versus? Are you asking to get unionized?
Right.
Um,
That's right. You know, what my husband used to say is when you see a union, there's been a really bad boss. That's the first, it's the canary in the coal mine that the unions come in when there's really bad management. And it's not about that you've done it, you did it to yourself. I do think that you want to have leaders who walk the talk.
mhm,
And when employees get together and get unhappy and start talking to each other about how unhappy they are, the number one thing they're talking about is hypocrisy.
right.
And it's, you say this and you do that, and you just can't let that happen. You've got to be the most authentic person, the chief authenticity officer.
That's actually a great way to, a great answer is part of being authentic is being anti-hypocritical,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, for
At
sure.
the end of the day, it's the hypocrisy. You're right. That when hypocrisy seeps into a culture, you lose your ability to say anything,
That's right. You're not
right?
believed on
You're not
anything.
believed on
Right.
anything.
And so then the thing about it is that then means that as a leader, sometimes you have to say very hard things. Okay. And just as human beings, we don't want to say hard things. We don't want to say hard truths. And we don't want to say to somebody, I really like you, but your performance is terrible. But I mean, you got to do that to maintain the trust. And I mean, of course, the next sentence should be, let's talk about ways to make your performance better. Or we've reached the end of the road and let's talk about a way to get you to the job where you really belong.
Hmm.
But you got to tell the truth, and truth and is really leads to trust and transparency, and that's a very virtuous circle to get into.
Well, one of the most stinging comments I ever received as a manager
Yeah,
was when I thought I was being nice to someone
yeah,
and I didn't give them direct feedback. And then we ended up parting ways a year or two later. And that employee said to me, why didn't you tell me earlier? And I tried to explain how I was being nice.
yeah.
And that employee said, you realize you took the option away from me to move on to something that fit me better
So true.
by the fact that you withheld that
That's
information.
right.
And that was like an arrow to the heart. You're like,
Yeah.
oh,
I thought I was being
I
nice.
thought I was being nice,
Yep.
but actually I robbed you of
Yes,
your own ability to make a decision.
it's the truest story, and I say it, and people squirm when I say it, but almost every person on earth would prefers the hard truth to a soft lie.
Right.
And you got to tell the hard truth over the soft lie. People will thank you for it. I mean, they don't like it in the moment, but otherwise you're stealing their optionality and you owe them that.
Yeah.
You know?
Another question for you, and this is going to dig into me a little bit. So my first job
Yeah.
out of college
Hmm.
is working for GE.
Yeah.
Is because I read a book on Jack's management style.
Yeah.
I believe I read it when either senior year of high school or freshman
Oh,
year of
you
college.
were precocious. Yeah.
Uh, Odd child, and I was
Yeah.
like, okay, that seems really interesting. And and what he says just makes sense. It
Yeah.
puts the world in place, and I was like,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
So, obviously, a huge Jack Welch fan. He had an impact on my life directly.
Yeah.
As you think about part of his legacy and
Yeah.
part of his management, what were a couple things where you go, hey, that was so uniquely him?
Yeah.
And I look for that trait in others. Like when I
Yeah.
see that trait in others, leaders, it reminds me of Jack.
Yeah, so it's candor. I
Mhm.
mean, and that hard truth, soft lie thing, that was him. He just told the truth all the time. I mean, very early on, right after I first met him, we were at a restaurant, and the waitress came over and he said, "What do you recommend?" And she said, "Oh, some dish." So he ordered it, and then she came over to get our dishes, and he said, "That was terrible. Why did you recommend it?" She goes, "It is terrible. They make me do it." And she said, "Why don't you tell the manager on the way out how terrible it was? They just force us to say it." And we all had a good laugh. And when he first said that was terrible, I was like, "Don't say that, don't say that." And he taught me like the power of honesty and candor and how much people crave it. And I love it when I see it in other people. And I do see it. I mean,
Mhm.
there's lots of CEOs who've got it. And so he also just loved people. Everyone was a friend. He just went in with thinking everyone had the best intentions. He just thought everyone was great. And this is like really hard to do in this day and age, right? We just all have our defenses up and this person's bad. This person's not like me. This person's different. This person said that once, and he was like, "Yeah, everybody's screwed up and broken. Just love everybody. Love every." When our kids used to go to work, okay, when they all got out of college and and he was always there because they all lived with us. Okay, I'm trying not to say that, but we had a good place to live, and they came and lived with us, right? It's nothing like mom's home cooking all the time. And when they would go out the door to go to work in the morning, he would literally shout at them as they went out the door, "Love everyone." That's the words to your kids that are going out the door. Jack Welch give you one piece of advice as you walk out the door: love everyone.
That didn't show up in the book that I read, but I like that.
Yeah,
And
no,
that
he just
seems
he was like,
consistent
right.
too with I think you can be him as a leader and also
Well,
and
okay,
also
so
a
we also
leader.
had 4 kids, 2 most extroverted people in the entire world.
Yeah,
Okay, him and me,
yeah.
okay? And we had 4 introverts. And I don't know, maybe because you have the most extroverted parents, then you get these kids who are pretty, and so the way it sort of presented was they weren't making as many friends as we desired them to make it work, and we understood that friends were what was gonna propel their careers, whatever careers they chose, and they did. They got that lesson, they learned that. But that was sort of part of it. What was just, get out of your shell, love everybody. So
Well, there's something else you and I had talked about previously too,
yeah.
and that's when someone had told Jack, another CEO, how lonely it is at the top.
Oh,
And I hear that, and actually there are times where you can start to feel it and feel self-pity, but I
mhm.
loved um,
He was a what BS, okay, he didn't say BS, and he was like, I had interviewed somebody, I was running HBR at the time, and I interviewed an Italian CEO who the whole point of it was it's very lonely at the top, and I was talking to him about it, and he was just outraged by it. He was like, "Are you kidding me? Everybody wants to be with you. You're the boss, and you could have everybody in the world around you if you wanted to." And this whole idea that, I guess one thing the CEO was saying was like, nobody tells you no, and he was like, Jack's feeling was, surround yourself with no people. Go
right.
find them. Go find the contrarians. Go find the people who are going to disagree with you on everything, and make sure they're right in the office next to you. And he didn't buy it. And I get it. He did. That was not who he was, but he was unique. You asked why he was unique. Yeah, that was another way he was unique.
I think that's a great lesson. If you're
Yeah.
feeling lonely
Yeah.
in your leadership position,
Something's wrong. Yeah.
go out and solicit feedback.
Yeah.
So, in closing here, just a couple personal questions for
Sure.
you. What are some of the things that you find exciting about the next 10 minutes, 10 weeks, 10 years? What's on your mind? We're curious to
I
hear.
do. Very nice to refer to
Yeah.
10, 10, 10, my first book. Thank you very much. Well, in 10 minutes, I'm in the middle of writing a book, so I'm working on that. And what's going to be really exciting is finishing it, okay? Because no one ever writes a book and finishes it and says, "Oh, that was easier than I thought." I mean, writing a book is hard. This is my 6th book. And I'm excited to get it done. And to have that finished. But I think right now I'm in a place where I'm very excited about this curriculum develop. I'm super excited about the initiative, and I have a granddaughter, and I have to tell you, that makes me very excited.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Susie, thank you so much for joining us
Yeah.
today. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.